Time for us to begin. We invite you to come on in, find a seat. I look out this morning and I see all you fine people in your fine clothes, and some of us old people still wearing ties. I see nice coiffures out there on the ladies. I have a question for you. How many consider that you are rich? Raise your hand. Oh, great. That's great. Now, there are some who didn't raise your hand. So let me ask you, I'll ask us all a few questions. How many of you, when you woke up this morning, were able to get a clean drink of water? Raise your hand. Okay. How many of you, when you woke up this morning, were able to get up and eat a meal? Raise your hand. Some of you aren't playing with me here. Let me ask that again. When you woke up this morning, were you able to get a meal? Raise your hand. Okay, thank you. Thank you for working with me there. I appreciate that. How many of you last night had a roof over your head? Okay, good. How many of you have transportation available to you? Raise your hand. Good. How many of you have an income, either a job or retirement or some form of income? Raise your hand. That's good. We're doing good. How many of you have your own teeth? No, don't raise your hand. Well, you know, it makes me wonder why some of you didn't consider yourself rich. You live in one of the greatest countries of the world, one of the richest countries, one of the countries where you can get basically what you want if you can afford it. You have food. You said you had food. You said you had a place to live. We didn't even talk about the spiritual things, the spiritual blessings, the spiritual things that we have, such as, if we're a Christian, such as access to God. Have you thought of the wealth associated with being able to talk to the creator of the universe? The one who holds it all in his hands? The one that controls everything? The one that has life for you and me? Or the spiritual blessing of having a spiritual protector. God said, I'll not let you be tempted more than you can withstand, 1 Corinthians 10:13, but with every temptation I will make thereby a way of escape. Now, he didn't say he's going to take temptation away. But he said, I'll make sure you don't have to fall to it if you look for that door when you're tempted. Sometimes that's hard to do. Sometimes it's easier to do. God is not always going to give us what we want, but I'm convinced he'll give us what we need. Even his own son Jesus, when he was in the garden praying, Father, 3 times, let this cup pass from me, if it is your will. What was God's answer to that prayer? I think he gave two answers. The first answer was no. I'm not going to let this cup pass from you. But then you notice what he did next. He sent an angel to support Jesus. So we may not always have the difficulty removed, but God will help us through it. What a spiritual blessing. And God has said, I'll take care of your needs. So we have a provider. We're getting pretty wealthy. Then somebody will say, oh, no, wait a minute, Smith. Inflation is totally out of control in this country. We have 6.4% inflation right now. And that's just unheard of. Well, the people in Argentina would laugh at you. This last year they had 100% inflation. Or the people, if you lived in Turkey, had 55% inflation this last year. By someone's count, and I didn't go try to verify it, by someone's count in the wealth registry, 129 nations in the world have higher inflation than we do. So we're still living in a pretty great nation. Well, somebody might say, wait a minute, Smith. Gas cost me $3 a gallon. Well, that's true here in Texas. A little higher in some places. A little higher. Belgium, Israel, and France right now are $9 a gallon. I think they would probably not have much sympathy for us. But groceries are getting higher. They're getting more expensive. England last week rationed their food so that you could buy 3 tomatoes, 3 cucumbers, and 3 peppers. That's all you were allowed to buy. That hit me kind of interesting because when the pandemic hit a couple of years ago, we'd go in the grocery store and there'd be empty shelves. Or if the shelf wasn't empty, it wasn't the brand we were used to. And we're sitting there with money and we can't buy what we want. What we want. And I told my wife, I said, I feel like I'm living in a third world country because I've got money and there aren't any things to buy. Well, that's coming around now, but not everywhere in the world. As of last count, this last year, there were 27 million refugees. Refugees being somebody going from one country to another. Over 50% of those 27 million were under 18 years of age. This is what's going on out there in the world. Are we rich? Africa right now is struggling just to get food. So let me ask the question again. How many of you in here consider yourself rich? Raise your hand. Thank you. We are. We are rich, but why did we not think we were rich first? What do we normally associate with riches? Money, stuff. You have to have more money. You have to have more bigger houses. You have to have a lake lot. You have to have a boat. You have to have 3 cars in a 2-car garage house. Stuff. Wife and I were laughing, looking at all our stuff and saying, you know what, when we die, the kids won't want any of it. They'll call Goodwill and say, come haul us all off. That's what stuff's for. Haul off or give away. You give it to somebody else that doesn't really want it either, so they give it away. That's stuff. That's what we consider as wealth. That's where our minds run. out of every 6 verses in the 4 accounts of the gospel have to do with man and his possessions. Now, I didn't count these all and verify it. This comes from somebody I was reading. But I think it's worth repeating. 1 in every 6 verses in the 4 accounts of the gospel have to do with man and his possession. It's ingrained in us. Acquisition of wealth, trying to get more money, more things, more stuff, according to the psychologist, is one of the highest drives in the human nature. It's interesting, though, no matter how much stuff we have, we still don't consider ourselves rich because we always look at somebody that has more. You ever noticed that? Have you ever really looked out and said, I've got more than him? No, no, no. You look out and say, he's got more than I do. I need to work another 5 hours this week. I need to have another job. I need. That's where our mindset tends to go as a human. Let's go to 2 Corinthians 4. I'm not nice like some of your teachers and put it up there for you. You're going to have to dig it out. 2 Corinthians 4, beginning in the 16th verse. So we do not lose heart, though our outer nature is wasting away. Our inner nature is being renewed every day. For this slight momentary affliction is preparing for us an eternal weight of glory beyond all comparison. Because we look not to the things that are seen, but to the things that are unseen. For the things that are seen are transient, but the things that are unseen are eternal. Let me repeat that last part. The things that are seen are transient, but the things that are unseen are eternal. Stuff goes away. But the spiritual things remain forever. The famous saying talking about a very rich man who died, and someone was standing there talking, and he said, well, do you know how much he left? And the other guy said, yeah, I do. He said, how much? Everything he had. That's what happened. That's why we're told to send on our treasures to heaven ahead of us. God is storing up our treasures. He says, not here on earth where moth and rust corrupt, eat it up, stuff goes away, but up in heaven where it stays forever. Jesus said, not all who say unto me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven, but those who, what? Do the will of my Father shall enter the kingdom. Our actions, our life here on earth is our card, our passkey into heaven. Oh, wait a minute, Smith, you can't save yourself. Really? Why does the Scripture say, work out your own salvation in fear and trembling? Oh, you mean you think you're good enough? Absolutely not. I'll never be able to get there on my own. But God's not going to put me there if I don't do something here on earth. And that something is follow His will. God made us people of choice. We can choose to follow Him. We can choose to ignore Him. Our choice. God will never force me to choose to go to heaven. But He says, if you choose to go to heaven and you're willing to live the way I want you to live, I'll make sure you get there. Because I know, God is saying, I know that you can never live exactly right. That's why I sent my son. That's why we had the Paschal Lamb. That's why his blood flowed. That's why we have to contact the blood so our sins are forgiven. And then with forgiven sins, we stand in his sight perfect. Riches, acquisition of things, temporary. Good works, obedience to God, eternal. Let's go over to 1 Timothy. 1 Timothy, the 6th chapter. Let's begin in the 9th verse. 1 Timothy 6:9. But those who desire to be rich fall into temptation, into a snare, into many senseless and hurtful desires that plunge men into ruin and destruction. For the love of money is the root of all evils. It is through this craving that some have wandered away from the truth and pierced their hearts with many pangs. Those who desire to be rich. We can be rich in many things. Our minds go to wealth, go to money, possessions, stuff. We can also be rich in time. We all have the same amount of time, but it depends on how we use it as to whether it is a curse or a benefit to us. But if you desire to be rich, if you do, you fall into temptation. God says, I cannot be tempted and I'll not tempt any man. But Satan is here on the earth. He's called the great tempter. He is going to be trying to get you as a Christian every day. I don't know why God and Satan are such enemies. I'm not told why they are. I just know they are, and I know that Satan wants you and me, in my mind, I should say, Satan wants you and me so he can snub his nose at God. Say, see, I got another one. Whether that's right or not, I don't know. That's the way I view it. If you desire to be rich, you run the risk of falling to that temptation. Now remember, God said, with every temptation, I'll give you a way of escape. But you have to look for that way. Fall into temptation, you fall into a snare. That's a trap. You get trapped just like the bear walking out in the country in the forest and steps on a bear trap, he's hung. Because that bear trap is chained to a tree and he can't get away. You fall into a trap, Satan's trap. You desire to be rich, you fall into many senseless and hurtful desires that plunge men to ruin and destruction. Ruin and destruction. That's your final outcome. That's hell. Desiring to be rich. The key word here is desiring. It's not being rich or being poor. It's the desire. It's what's in your heart. And that word desire, it has a very strong meaning. It means that I'm willing to do whatever I need to do to obtain this goal. I want to be rich, so I'm willing to do whatever I need to do to be rich. Worldly things, stuff. For the love of money is the root of all evils. Is there anything wrong with money? Anything wrong with money? Anybody have anything? Anybody have a problem with money? I mean, you have a problem, yeah. Money's neutral. Money's neither good nor bad. It's what you do with it. So money is just a thing. It's stuff. The love of money, and that means, again, I'm willing to do whatever I need to do to obtain that money. The love of money is the root of all evils. That gets back to the psychologist saying that this drive to be rich is one of the real basic drives of humanity. And so this basic drive leads us to this love of money, and it is the basis of all sorts of evils. It is through this craving. Do you notice that word? I crave those riches. It is through this craving that some have wandered away from the faith and have pierced their hearts with many pangs, have wandered away from the faith, have fallen from grace. Some of our religious friends teach that you can't fall from grace, that once you're saved, you're always saved. There are many scriptures that refute that, but this is one of them. That yes, you can fall away. Work out your own salvation with fear and trembling. Why the fear and trembling? That I don't fall away. But if we go back to the 6th verse here in 1 Timothy 6, there is great gain in godliness with contentment. For we brought nothing into the world, and we cannot take anything out of the world. But if we have food and clothing, with these we shall be content. We all said this morning that we had food, we had clothing, we even had a place to live, we had clean water. A lot of places in the world don't have clean water. We had transportation. We need to be satisfied with that and not drive for more stuff. Anything wrong with stuff? No, there's nothing wrong with stuff. Just like there's nothing wrong with money. Stuff is neutral. It's what you do with it, what you do to obtain it. God says, if you have your needs covered, the rest of it's just things that are temporal. They're going to go away. They're not permanent. We need to be content with the necessities of life. Anything wrong with having 2 cars instead of 1? No. Anything wrong with having more than a kitchen, a bedroom, and a bathroom in your house? No. Anything wrong with having a coat and a tie? No, other than having to wear it. But I mean, it's our attitude. It's what's going on in here with that stuff that we have to be careful of. Colossians 3:5 says that covetousness, that's desiring to get all this stuff, is idolatry. And God will not share His kingdom, His reign, His rulership, His lordship with any other god. All other gods are called idols. You can have time can be an idol. Stuff can be an idol. A little wooden thing on your mantle can be an idol. There are all sorts of idols. Anything that comes between you and God. And Paul says that covetousness is one of those idols. It's idolatry. Well, how do we conquer this covetousness? And how do we get rich toward God? First thing I'd say is we have to believe what God says We have to believe it to be true, and we have to be willing to obey it. So to know what God says, we have to go here. And then when we go here, we find out what he says. Then we have to be willing to put it into play. Those who do the will of my Father. That puts us that makes us rich toward God. Second thing I'd say is we need to pray. We need to pray that we don't enter into temptation. Because temptation is going to be what drives us towards this stuff. So we pray. 2 Corinthians 8 and 9 and 1 Corinthians 16 tells us that we need to give generously. We need to give to others. This takes us away from covetousness. We need to invest our time and money in other people, not hoard it all to ourselves. Be content with what we have. As it's often been said, it's all right for a man to possess things, but it's not all right for things to possess the man. Repeat that. It's all right for a man to possess things, but it's not all right for things to possess a man. As Brady likes to say, that's the end of the introduction. Now we go to the lesson. Luke 13. I'm sorry, Luke 12, beginning with the 13th verse. We have a parable that's normally called the parable of the rich fool. That's why we spent all this time on riches, to get our minds in gear for what Jesus is going to say here. Luke 12, beginning with the 13th verse. Let's go back to the first verse to set the picture here. In the meantime, when so many thousands of multitude had gathered together that they trod upon one another, he began to say to his disciples first. You get that? When thousands of people were there to hear Jesus, there were so many pushing up to be around him, they were walking on each other. This is the setting of this parable. Then in the 13th verse, one of the multitude, that's the thousands that were there, one of the multitude said to him, "Teacher, bid my brother divide the inheritance with me." But he said to him, "Man, who made me a judge or divider over you?" And he said to them, "Take heed and beware of all covetousness, for a man's life does not consist of the abundance of his possessions." Picture. Jesus has thousands of people crowding in on him, walking on each other. He turns to his disciples and starts teaching them some things. He turns to the multitude and is teaching them things. And this man comes up, probably not at all about what Jesus is teaching. And he said, he probably, this is my opinion, probably sees Jesus as a very wise rabbi, because rabbis usually did the teaching, rabbis, teacher. And so he probably viewed Jesus as a very, very righteous or very good, wise teacher. So he goes up to him and says, "Teacher, have my brother share his inheritance with me." Now, in Jewish times, who got the bulk of these things that were passed down? The first male. In their tradition, the first male actually got 2/3 of the inheritance. No, that's wrong. He got double portion of the inheritance. So if it's this man and his brother, the brother would get 2/3 if he's the older brother. And the implication is this is the younger brother, because if he was the older brother, he would be in control. The oldest son controlled the inheritance. So he's either saying, my brother is a cheat and he's cheating me out of my third, or he's saying, I really think I ought to have as much as he should. So, Rabbi, have my brother share with me. This is the picture that's going on when Jesus says, man, who made me a judge or a divider over you? Jesus says, I'm not getting involved in these worldly things. This again is my thought. He's probably saying, I don't have time for that piddly stuff. I've got more important things to do here. That's just the way I think about it. He goes on and says, take heed and beware of all covetousness. This covetousness, this wanting stuff. The young man or the man wanted more stuff. For a man's life does not consist of the abundance of his possession. A man's life does not made up of stuff. There's more to a man's life than stuff. This was Jesus' answer to him. Then he goes on in 16. And he told them a parable. We finally got there. Saying, the land of a rich man brought forth plentifully. And he thought to himself, what shall I do? For I have nowhere to store my crops. And he said, I will do this. I will pull down my barns and build larger ones. And there I will store all my grain and my goods. And I will say to my soul, soul, you have ample goods laid up for many years. Take your ease, eat, drink, and be merry. But God said to him, fool, this night your soul is required of you, and the things you have prepared, whose will they be? So is he who lays up the treasure for himself and is not rich toward God. I think one of the things we need to point out in this parable, one of the first things, beginning in the 17th verse, he thought to himself, what shall I do? For I have nowhere to store my crops. And he said, I will do this. I will pull down my barns and build larger ones. There I will store all my grain and my goods. And I will say to my... You see that going through here? It's all about him. It's all about him and his stuff. He says, I've got so much stuff. I have so much grain. I have so much stuff that I can't store it all. I'm running out of storage space. So I'm going to go tear all that down and I'm going to build me some bigger storage space. I wondered why he didn't just add on to it. But anyway, he tore it down and he's going to build a bigger one so he can store all of his stuff. You know what came through to me as I thought about this? He never once thought, I have too much stuff, I'll give some to the poor. Or I'll pass this out over here. I really don't need all that. My barns are full. Why don't I take this and help others? This apparently never came to his mind. He wanted more stuff. He wanted to be able to handle more stuff. And Jesus finished it off there in 21. He who lays up treasures for himself and is not rich, so is he who lays up treasures for himself and is not rich toward God. You see, this man said, I want to eat, drink, and be merry. I want my pleasure. Sometimes we don't get our pleasure. Miller? I see. Okay. In case you couldn't hear, Millard said the reason he wanted to tear it all down and have new barns is so he could have automatic doors on that barn and he wouldn't have to go out and open them. Makes sense to me. I understand that. Kind of like adding on a 20-foot shed behind the shop you already have so you can put your tractor. Yeah, kind of like that, yeah. Fool, this night your soul is required of you. That's the bottom line to this parable. We don't know how much time we have left. Jesus is saying to this man, why are you so worried about having more barns, bigger barns, storing more stuff, having more stuff when tonight you're going to die? When I put myself in the place of that man, and I've been there, would I really want to face God and say, God, I had a bigger barn. I had more stuff. You can't believe all the stuff I had down there. And God said, yeah, I made it all. I can understand that. But when you left earth down there, you left all that stuff down there. The only thing you have up here is what you sent ahead of you. Because you took nothing into the world, and you're taking nothing out. You had to send it ahead. And brethren, if you haven't sent your treasures ahead, you're falling into the bigger barn scenario. Jesus went from there in 22, and he said to his disciples, now this section 13 through 21 was teaching the multitude. Now he turns to his disciples, as he quite often did in teaching groups. He would tell the group and quite often would give the group a parable, and his disciples, his apostles, would say, we don't understand. And he'd take them off to the side and explain it. So after giving this parable, he turns to his disciples in 22. Therefore I tell you, do not be anxious about your life, what you'll eat, or about your body, what you shall put on. For life is more than food, and the body more than clothing. Consider the ravens. They neither sow nor reap. They neither store house nor barn, and yet God feeds them. Of how much more value are you than the birds? And which of you, being anxious, can add a cubit to the span of his life? If then you are not able to do a small thing as that, why are you anxious about the rest? Consider the lilies, how they grow. They neither toil nor spin, yet I tell you, even Solomon in all his glory was not arrayed like one of these. But if God so clothes the grass, which is alive in the field today and tomorrow is thrown into the oven, how much more will he clothe you, O men of little faith? And do not seek what you are to eat, what you are to drink, nor be anxious mind. For all the nations of the world seek these things, and your Father knows that you need them. Instead, seek his kingdom, and those things shall be added to you as well. Don't be anxious. Don't worry. Let me tell you the secret to not worrying. If you have something you're worrying about, anything, take a look at it and say, is there anything I can do about this? And if there is, do it. Then you don't have to worry about it anymore. If you're worrying about something and you take a look at it and say, is there anything I can do about this? And the answer comes back, no, there's nothing I can do about that. Okay, fine, there's nothing I can do about it. No sense in worrying. Either way, there's no sense in worrying. Either you fix the event or you can't fix the event, and don't worry about it either way. And that's what Jesus is saying here. Don't worry about it. God's going to take care of you. Which of you, worrying, can add a cubit to the span of his life? A cubit is from your fingertip to your elbow. And the span of life, if you stretch it out for however many years you've been alive and put it on the ground, and you can't even add that much to it. He says, if you can't even do that, then why worry? Why worry? The rich young fool, or the rich fool, I don't know how young he was, the rich fool wanted more stuff. God tells his disciples, don't worry about that stuff. Jesus tells his disciples, don't worry about that stuff. God will take care of you. Instead, there in 31, seek his kingdom, and all the stuff you need, he'll give you. God doesn't mind you having stuff as long as you keep it in its proper place. The rich fool was not keeping it in his proper place. It had come between him and where he should be spiritually. There's nothing wrong with you having stuff. Keep it in its right place. Jesus wasn't teaching financial dereliction. That's big words. Jesus wasn't teaching walk away from all money and don't even think about it. That wasn't what he was teaching. 2 Corinthians 12, 1 Timothy 5, 2 Corinthians 3, 1 Thessalonians 4, Colossians 3, Ephesians 6 says we're to provide for our own. And we're to provide for our own living if we're able. If we're able, we're to provide. Luke 16 says that we're to be wise stewards of our possessions. Put our stuff in the right place. And he also says that honest labor deserves honest wages. 1 Corinthians 9, Matthew 10, Luke 10. What Jesus is teaching here is prioritization. There's another one of those words. Prioritization. I'm going to set it out in sequence. I'm going to prioritize it. This one's more important than this one. And the priority that Jesus sets up is God is first, stuff comes later. Seek the kingdom of God. God will take care of the rest of it. God over possession. That's the message that comes out of this parable and the teachings associated with it. Comments? Questions? No. Okay. Gonna get out early, so don't go disturb the kids. We'll see y'all tonight.